going to get going here. Hi everybody, it's good to see people in person again, and thank you for joining us for the Ford Aeronutronics project update. We're glad to see you. This is the Water Board's meeting. And very quickly, I just wanted to go through a couple of things. I want to make sure that you signed in when you came in here. We'll add you to our mailing list if you'd like, but what we really want to is to get your phone numbers in case we have to do any kind of COVID tracing. So cross your fingers, we won't, but we just need to do that. Also, you're welcome not to wear a mask, but if you're unvaccinated, we do ask that you wear a mask during this meeting and socially distance from people. I think we can do that right now. I don't think we have that many people. Why? Oh, because we're trying to follow.
Oh, we can follow CDC?
We're trying to follow the CDC protocol, yeah. Okay. All right, there's food in the corner, there's water there. Restrooms are out here towards the left through the door, and then walk down about 10 steps and you'll see the restrooms on your left. When you came in, I think you probably signed in and there were handouts there. We have tonight's presentation, the fact sheet, a couple of acronyms, glossary, and a few other things, so make sure you get that. And most importantly, you were probably given an index card. That index card is to ask questions. So if you would like to have questions, if you have questions tonight, please write those down. Sarah and Ariel will pick those up and give them to me, and I'll read those questions, and Jessica and the team will answer them. Let me think, anything else I need to go through? One last thing, this meeting is being recorded, and there's a camera back here. It's being live streamed on YouTube. I think this is the first time we've done a hybrid meeting, trying to figure out if people want to come here in person or if they'd rather watch it from the comfort of their own homes. So if you're uncomfortable being recorded, please just let us know when we pick up I don't think they'll even have to be on the camera actually, so that's not a problem. But if you're uncomfortable being recorded, don't look back there. I guess that's what I need to tell you. Let's see, I think that's all I have tonight. I'm going to give this over to Jessica. We have a short, I have to tell you this part, pardon me. Excuse me, let me go through this. This is our agenda tonight. Again, I'm Tracy Craig. We have a project update. We'll talk about upcoming work activities, followed by questions and answers. And the purpose of this meeting, you can read that yourself, discuss environmental investigations, risk assessments, our test results from the soil vapor extraction, and also mitigation strategies and next steps. Talked about the handouts. Tonight we have here with us the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and then of course with the contractor that Ford is using. And just let me hand this over to you.
Hi, can you guys hear me in the back?
Yes.
All right, so thank you guys for those that have come in person, for those that are online. Tonight's presentation is going to just cover the following items. A brief project recap, an overview of vapor intrusion, an overview of the screening levels. Then I'm going to give a summary of what has occurred since our last meeting. Next, I'll give a brief discussion on the human health risk assessment reports and just a general overview of those results. Then I'll talk about the soil vapor extraction pilot test, followed by the remediation process and what that entails. And then finally, I'll go over the next steps for the project. Okay, so before we get started, I've had a few people over the last year just kind of ask, how did we get here? So just want to give a brief recap about the site and kind of the how and the why of the vapor intrusion assessment and how it began. So a lot of you have heard this, so I'm going to go over it quickly, but if you do have questions, please let me know. So first, here's the former facility on the map. When the facility closed in 1993, cleanup activities occurred for about 3 years. Then in 1996, based on information provided by Ford, the Water Board determined that remediation of the main area was complete. And then in 1997, the regulatory agency at the time, which was the Local Oversight Program, they granted soil closure. And and this allowed the property to be rezoned from industrial use to residential use. And the redevelopment of that former facility began in about 1998. So there was the requirement though for continued off-site groundwater assessment and remediation, and the case was transferred to the water board at that time, and it has been an open case with us since then, and all work has been conducted by Ford under the voluntary agreement program with us. So in addition to the ongoing groundwater assessment and monitoring and some selective remediation, in 2006, 2008, and 2012, there were select soil gas assessments that were conducted in select areas. And those assessments concluded that health risks from vapor intrusion were not present. Now, these conclusions were made prior to, or were made without any indoor air samples being collected, and it was based on industry knowledge of vapor intrusion at that time. So the conclusions were also made prior to the US EPA 2014 memo regarding short-term TCE exposure risks, as well as the 2016 San Francisco Bay Water Board environmental screening levels, or ESLs, that we utilize. So then in 2017, a conceptual site model was prepared and submitted for the site, and a conceptual site model is a report that looks at all of the site history, it takes all of the historical data, and it compares it to the current screening levels and industry standards for that time, and identifies any potential data gaps that would require additional investigation. So one of the data gaps that was identified was the need to reevaluate the site for potential vapor intrusion from those previously mentioned historical soil gas assessments, as well as just the groundwater concentrations. And then in 2018, the vapor intrusion assessment did begin. So now we're going to talk and just give a brief refresher of what vapor intrusion is, and this slide again is probably familiar to most of you, but for anyone who hasn't attended the meetings, vapor intrusion is the migration of vapors from below the ground into a building. So first, in order for there to be the potential for vapor intrusion, there first has to be soil gas, which is also referred to as soil vapor. And soil gas is found in the soil's air spaces, as shown in this inlay. So here's your soil particles, and that red shading would be the soil vapor. So at this site, the two primary contaminants of concern are tetrachloroethene, PCE, or trichloroethene, TCE. And both of those are vapor-forming chemicals. So soil gas originates from a source of vapor-forming chemicals, whether it's in soil and or groundwater. And the contamination, whether it's soil or groundwater, can off-gas and become soil gas contamination, which can migrate below the ground, as shown by these red arrows in this figure. So as the soil gas migrates below the ground, it can enter buildings through cracks in the foundation or utilities that go into the building. And now, normal ventilation can flush the chemicals out of the building, and so that way it doesn't cause a problem. But if there isn't enough ventilation to flush it out, they can collect in a building, and it may collect at concentrations that do pose a risk to human health. So it's also important to note that there can be other sources of chemicals, both in indoor and outdoor air. So if there's bad air pollution outside, it can come into a building, and if there's chemicals used in the home, like cleaning products, some scented candles, or even dry clean clothes, that can also introduce chemicals into the indoor air as well. So now I just want to do a brief discussion of the environmental screening levels, or ESLs, that we use, and that's what we've been using to do the initial evaluation for the site. So the ESLs were developed by research scientists at the San Francisco Bay Water Board, and that's the same type of regulatory agency as the Santa Ana Water Board, but they cover the San Francisco area and are just kind enough to share their hard work with the rest of us. So the ESLs are developed for over 100 chemicals, and it gives us screening levels for soil, groundwater, soil gas, and indoor air contamination. The way a screening level is calculated is by combining the three following elements. So first, the toxicity information of a specific chemical of concern, then the specific exposure scenario for each receptor, being skin contact, inhalation, digestion, and then the acceptable risk level that these screening levels are to protect to. So acceptable risk levels look at both cancer and non-cancer health effects. And for screening levels, we have the acceptable cancer risk is 1 in a million chance of developing cancer. And that's referred to as cancer risk. And this is a standard that has been developed by the US EPA. The other one is no harmful non-cancer health effects, such as liver or kidney damage. And this is referred to as hazard. So risk and hazard are, those calculations are what are considered when making risk management decisions. And I'll talk a little bit more on that towards later on in the presentation. So the three elements are combined to develop a screening level for a specific chemical. These ESLs address long-term exposure, so we're talking 26 years. The ESLs allow us to quickly focus on the most significant problems at a contaminated site. And I want to make an important note that ESLs are a starting point. Once we have site-specific data, that is what is evaluated within these risk assessment reports, and the conclusions from the risk assessment reports help us to determine what the next steps for the project are to address the known risks to human health and the environment. And the ESLs are not necessarily cleanup goals, but they can be if there's direct exposure, such as exceedances in indoor air. So this is just a summary of what I said, and wanted to put it up here for your reference, and that way you can look back at it later if you look at this presentation at a later date. Okay, so now we can start talking about what's been occurring at the site since our last community meeting. So first, with the vapor intrusion assessment, 29 soil gas probes have been installed at 15 locations. These were installed to further evaluate the extent of the soil gas plume. There was 1,072 soil gas probes sampled, and 85 homes have been sampled, and reports are now being submitted on a semi-annual schedule. And we are transitioning from assessment to monitoring for most areas, except where there is some data gap assessment activities occurring. And I just want to point this out because that's an important milestone, because this means that we can start looking at the next steps in regard to cleanup activities. And I'll talk more on that towards the end of the presentation. And then there's the data gap assessment activities, which is conducting additional groundwater assessment and evaluating soil gas deeper than 15 feet below the ground surface. So groundwater grab samples were collected from 6 locations, and in each location, they had multiple discrete depth samples collected, so 2 or more. And they were collected at depths ranging from 46 feet below ground surface to 106 feet below ground surface. And then 9 soil gas probes were installed at 6 locations to evaluate the vertical extent of soil gas. And this figure just highlights the 2 areas where the additional assessment activities are occurring. So north of the former facility, here's the facility. We have this location up here. This is the Newport North apartment complex property, as well as the adjacent area, that adjacent Caltrans right away. It's the Bonita Creek bike trail walking path. And then the other area is south of the former facility within the Belport Hill community and the Sea Island community, as well as the right-of-ways. So another big milestone that's occurred since our last meeting has been the submittal of the human health risk assessment reports. We have received all 9 requested reports, and 8 of them were for residential communities, and 1 of the reports was for the 3 commercial properties that were evaluated. OEHHA is assisting the water board with the reviews of the report. And just a reminder, OEHHA is our sister agency, who is the lead state agency for the assessment of health risks posed by environmental contaminants. Therefore, for this case, we have a toxicologist from OEHHA, Amanda, who's here tonight, to assist with addressing any health risk concerns as well as the review of the human health risk assessments. The Water Board, we have responded to 4 of the 9 reports to date, and I am currently working on 2 additional responses right now, so I hope to get those out soon. Once we've prepared those responses, we are holding community-specific meetings. We have conducted 3 meetings to discuss the results and the next steps for their respective risk assessment reports, and we will be reaching out to the remaining 5 communities once we complete our reviews and responses to discuss those results and the next steps. And just the general next steps that are coming from the risk assessment reports. There's 2 main things. We have first the need to conduct long-term indoor air monitoring to confirm the results of the risk assessment reports remain protective of human health. And in order to do that, the monitoring frequency is going to be anywhere from every 6 months to once every 5 years. And that frequency is going to depend on the future risk calculations from the risk assessment report, as well as the stability of the plume of the soil gas plume. So is it shrinking in size, are the concentrations going down, or are the concentrations increasing? That also will play a role. And then the other item is preparing a feasibility study and remedial action plans based on the results and the review of the risk assessment reports. So I've shown this figure before, and I know it's really busy, and I don't expect any of you guys to really be able to read too much of it, but I just want to go over it because it's similar to what's referenced in a number of vapor intrusion guidance documents, and it lays out the risk management process. So this first section here looks at risk numbers, both current risk and future risk, and these numbers are what's calculated in those risk assessment reports. This middle section here just assigns a priority to them, and the last section here just lists the potential response actions. So the Water Board, we evaluate the current risk and hazard calculations, which is based on existing indoor air data, along with future risk and hazard calculations, and that is based on soil gas data to determine the most appropriate next steps. The potential response actions could be monitoring, it could be additional assessment, mitigation, remediation, or a combination of these. Also, we do take into account the higher of the calculations when evaluating risk and hazard. So of the risk assessments that we have reviewed, we have seen current and future risk range from green to red within a community. We've seen it range from just green to yellow, and we've also seen it go from yellow to red for future risk. So an example of what we do with these results is for homes that have current risk that's in this green zone here, but then the future risk has that up in this middle area, kind of medium priority area for future. Monitoring is going to be the most appropriate path forward. But if current indoor air results are in this yellow area, and we're seeing future risk up here in the red, we're going to want mitigation or remediation and monitoring as the path forward for this site. And the point that I just really want to make is we look at both current and future risk calculations to support our risk management decisions, and we want, they need to be protective of human health. All right, so this slide again, it just summarizes what I said on the previous slide and it's here for your reference for later if you look at this presentation in the future. Okay, so now we'll talk about the soil vapor extraction pilot tests that were recently conducted. And first, I'm just going to give a brief refresher about what soil vapor extraction is. It's also referred to as SVE. And this figure is just an example of how this type of remediation works. So soil vapor extraction is a remedial technology that removes vapors from the area above groundwater, which is referred to as the vadose zone. So contamination within that beta zone is removed in the form of vapors through extraction wells. And those vapors are treated above ground, and then the clean vapors are released to the atmosphere. So just this little refresher, this is that inlay I showed at the beginning of the presentation. Here's your soil, here's the soil, contaminated soil vapor. That's what's being extracted by the extraction wells. So the pilot tests were conducted at 3 locations. We had the Bonita Creek area, and it was within the Caltrans right away, so just to the, I think it was just east of the Newport North Apartments. Down here, there was a second location at the Bay Ridge Park community, and a third location in the Sea Island community. So prior to conducting the pilot test, 4 vapor extraction wells were installed, and Bonita Creek and the Sea Island locations each had 1 extraction well due to the depth to groundwater. And then Bay Ridge Park, they had 2 extraction wells. One was shallow, one was deep, because groundwater is deeper at that location. So to ensure the proper monitoring of that pilot test, 29 additional soil gas probes were installed at 8 locations. And then prior to starting the pilot test, 45 soil gas probes were sampled to determine baseline concentrations. And there were nearby soil gas probes that were monitored during the pilot test to evaluate 2 main things. So first, it was vacuum pressure to see if and how much effect the extraction well was having to determine the radius of influence, which is just the effective extent of vacuum the extraction well is having. And then second is mass removed. Soil vapor data is collected from these extraction wells and nearby soil gas probes, both before and after the pilot test, to evaluate how much contamination is removed. So before I start talking about the results of the pilot test, I do want to provide some industry standards just to give, for comparison purposes, of what would be considered successful soil vapor extraction. So a radius of influence of anywhere from 20 to 50 feet or greater, and then mass removal of 1 pound per day at the start of a soil vapor extraction. Results from the pilot test are as follows. We have the Bonita Creek area. This operated for 5 days for a total of 46 hours. And I do want to mention that the system only operated during the day at all the locations for about 8 to 10 hours each. And so that's why it's not bigger hours for the 5 days. But the radius of influence, that was 89 feet. And then the mass removed was 0.02 pounds. At the Sea Island community, that system operated for 6 days for a total of 52 hours. The radius of influence there was 64 feet, and the total mass removed was 0.03 pounds. And then for the Bay Ridge Park community, that pilot test operated for 15 days for a total of 130 hours. It went longer because it had the 2 extraction wells to evaluate. The radius of influence was 68 feet for the shallow well, 72 feet for the deeper well, and then the total mass removed from this location was 0.23 pounds. So the small amount of mass that was removed is consistent with the lower VOC concentrations that we have seen for this site, but I do want to provide some clarification. However, when I say lower VOC concentrations, the concentrations are still high enough that vapor intrusion is occurring in some areas. So this photo shows, is from one of the pilot test locations down at the Bonita Creek area, just to show you what the setup looked like. There's also posters over on this side of the room if you want to get a closer look at each location. They have some additional photos. If you have any questions regarding that. There will be people answer that.
So one quick question.
Yeah.
So were they only running for those few hours during those days? Are they not continually running currently? As far as like my impression, they would just be running constantly or like every day during the daytime, I guess.
So the SBE systems only operated for the pilot test, just for those 5 days, and then moved to the next location, and then to the third location.
So there's nothing running currently then?
Correct, yeah, they're working on feasibility studies and remedial action plans. So So now I want to take just a brief moment, or maybe a little bit longer than a brief moment, there's a lot of information up on this slide, to discuss the remediation process. So first is site investigation. Before a site can go into remediation, which is also referred to as cleanup, it is necessary to know the extent of contamination, and this includes the field investigation. So for this site, this is what has been collecting the soil gas, groundwater, and indoor air sampling that's been occurring for the last couple of years. The data collected is needed for the risk evaluation, which is presented within those human health risk assessment reports. The risk evaluation determines if a site requires cleanup, additional monitoring, more assessment, or if no action is necessary, and at least for at that time. And then the next step is the remedial action plan. So for this project, that report is called the Feasibility Study and Remedial Action Plan, or FSRAP. And I'll give more details on that report in the next slide. This process can take about 6 months from developing the FSRAP to getting our approval or our comments back. The FSRAP develops and evaluates remedial alternatives, which includes one or more remedial technologies for each alternative. And they look at each of those alternatives and they compare it to selected criteria, and I'll list what those criteria are and why they need to be met. Then the remedial action plan recommends one of the remedial alternatives, and the report is submitted in draft form to allow for public comment prior to finalizing. So the regulatory agency, so we can accept the recommendations as is, or we can accept it with comments, or we can reject it entirely. But once the regulatory agency approves the draft FSRAP, then comes the public comment period step. And that public comment period is 30 days. And this is when the proposed remedy is announced, and it provides an opportunity for public input. And public comments are incorporated into the final FSRAP as feasible. Once the FSRAP has been finalized, next is remedial design. And this step can take about 6 months, and it includes the remedial design and implementation plan that is submitted to the Water Board for approval, as well as securing all of the necessary permits. And I do want to mention, when it comes to preparing that remedial design, Ford will be working with the individual communities where any active remediation is going to be necessary in the process of developing those plans. And then we get to the remedy implementation step, and this includes the safe implementation of the remedy, as well as the operation and maintenance of the remedy, which does include regular monitoring. And it's important to note that the duration of these steps can change due to weather, permitting, and just some other factors. And then the final step, once remediation is complete, is post-remediation monitoring. This is important because during this phase, that's when we evaluate post-remediation concentrations and determine any concentration trends, meaning are concentrations increasing, decreasing, or staying the same. And this information is helpful because it helps us to determine if additional remediation is warranted or not. And that post-remediation monitoring is also one of the lines of evidence that's necessary when the site does get to closure. So now I just want to take a moment to talk about what the draft feasibility study and remedial action plan, or FSRAP, is and what it includes, since this report is one of those next steps following our review of the human health risk assessments. So the FSRAP covers the following items. First, it proposes specific remedial action objectives or cleanup goals. The report includes a feasibility study to evaluate the different remedial technologies based on the following criteria, which is the ability to implement, the effectiveness of the technology, as well as cost. And it identifies and evaluates a remedial alternative based on that feasibility study. And I do want to mention that all remedial action plans do have a remedial alternative of no action, and this is included for comparison purposes. And then lastly, it proposes the remedial alternative for the water board approval and for public review and comment. And so this is the National Contingency Plan's 9 evaluation criteria that remedial alternatives are compared to. And they're broken down into 3 different groups. There's the threshold criteria, the primary balancing criteria, and the modifying criteria. All of the threshold criteria must be satisfied for a remedial alternative to be considered. Therefore, the remedial alternative must be protective of human health and the environment, and it must comply with state and federal requirements. So as a result, that remedial alternative of no action is typically thrown out as an option at this point. The next is the primary balancing criteria, and these 5 criteria are just used to weigh the major trade-offs among the different alternatives, and they're listed here for your reference. And then finally is the modifying criteria, and that addresses the regulatory and public acceptance of the alternative. And community input and acceptance is especially important to the water board, and it is mentioned in the statutes regarding cleanup. So there's 2 main things that are occurring at the site, in addition to just the ongoing vapor intrusion monitoring. First is the data gap assessment activities, and then some just a general reporting. So this includes continued assessment activities of groundwater and soil gas to just further evaluate those 2. The water board is continuing their review and comments of the human health risk assessment reports. And then Ford is preparing the draft FS RAPs for specific areas based on the results of the human health risk assessments. And then there's the individual community meetings. For some of you, we have already had these. Others, they will be coming soon. So we want to discuss the results of the community-specific risk assessments with that community and answer any questions, and then discuss the draft feasibility study and remedial action plans and receive public comment. And so what's beyond the 6 months out? So I just want to discuss what's going to be happening, what we see in the foreseeable future, and I do want to note that these 3 main primary tasks can all go in parallel. It's not just adding up. So first we have monitoring, and this is going to be ongoing until case closure, and that includes monitoring groundwater and soil gas to evaluate the plume stability. Both of those are sampled 2 times a year. And then there's also the long-term indoor air monitoring, and that monitoring frequency is going to range anywhere from every 6 months to once every 5 years. And that frequency, again, is dependent on those future risk calculations from the risk assessments. Then there is those risk assessment reports. Now, all of the initial reports have been submitted, but they will be updated as more information becomes available. So as additional folks sign up and get their homes tested and we get new data, or is the long-term indoor air monitoring, is that information dangerous? If it does, it will be reevaluated. And these updates just are meant to confirm that the current risk calculations remain protective. And then finally is remediation, which will include remedial design, the remedy implementation, post-remediation monitoring. Okay, so to summarize, data gap assessment activities will continue until groundwater and soil gas contaminant plumes have been adequately delineated. We'll just continue to gain access and test indoor air, sharing the results of the risk assessment reports in community-specific meetings, and then begin remediation activities in select areas following the remediation process. So for more information, there's GeoTracker, which is the state's database where all of the reports and analytical data get uploaded. Virus List is the state's email notification list. The Water Board also has a web page for this project. Board also developed a site-specific website as well as an 800 number, and they have an informational email as well that they send out notifications, and then there is the local information repository here at the local library. So that concludes my presentation. We have our subject matter experts, and I'm going to hand it over to Tracy.
Thank you. And I ask our panel to come sit up here and I'll give them a minute to do that. And then if people have questions, if you can fill out the cards and raise your hands, we'll pick them up and I'll read them out. And while we're doing that, I'd like the panel to introduce themselves to you all. So you met Jessica, and Nick is sitting down and he's going to go next.
Hi, I'm Nick Kennedy. I'm also the regional board. I work with Jessica closely on this project, and every once in a while she asks my opinion. I will try to help her.
Hi there, I'm Amanda Colombo.
Yeah, she did. Good, who's next?
I'm a toxicologist and I work for the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and that's part of the California Environmental Police.
And then what does a toxicologist do, just for people who don't know what that term means?
I describe the health risks of the chemicals, like the types of toxic effects in my experience, and try to explain what the risks mean to the visitor.
Mike Barnes with Wood Environmental and Infrastructure. We are the consultant for Ford Motor Company. I'm the project manager.
Okay, we're not going to use stands
Yeah.
this time.
My name is Karen Kelly, and I'm also a toxicologist, human health risk assessor that works for Wood, and so one of the people preparing the reports.
All right, I have a question, and you know, we don't have that many people here, so if you'd like to raise your hand or you're more comfortable asking your question in person, that's fine. I'm going to read this first, and then we have a microphone. I'll bring it over to you, and you can speak into it, okay? You have tested soil, but not people. How can humans find out how much of these, I think it says deadly carcinogens, they have ingested, and how much is dangerous? No remediation, that's the first question, so let's do that one first. So how can humans find out if they have, how much they have ingested and how much is dangerous?
So testing, it's really hard to do because these chemicals don't last in your body. So if you test somebody, you might know what they were exposed to today and yesterday, but it can't tell you what you were exposed to in the past. So we rely on indoor air testing to estimate what you all are exposed to in your homes. Can you not hear me?
Yes.
You have to get back right to it.
Is this better?
Yes.
Is that, okay. So, sorry, if somebody is tested, it will tell you what you were exposed to, like today or yesterday, for these types of chemicals because they break down in the body quickly. It won't tell you if you had a long-term exposure. So the best way we have to estimate that is by testing your homes and see what's in your homes and estimating the exposure that way.
Anybody else have any Great, and then we have no remediation sites identified yet, right? Is that correct?
Okay, so we just started getting the reports, and there's one location, one community has been identified, no, two communities have been identified to start remediation. That's Bay Ridge Park community and the Belcourt Terrace community to have some soil vapor extraction workers there. We did one public meeting to discuss that draft FS route with Bay Ridge Park, and then for Belcourt Terrace, that's next on the list. I'm still working on my review of that report.
You know what, wait a minute, we have somebody with a microphone, but first of all, this gentleman with the, do you just have a clarifying
Yeah, it
question?
was a clarifying.
Oh, okay, Sarah, just get to the microphone if you would.
I'll just repeat what she asked. So the question was, she just asked me to repeat the two communities. Which is Bay Ridge Park and then Belcourt Terrace.
That's different than Belcourt Hill.
Correct. There's a whole lot of points.
I don't think I need a microphone, thank you. Just regarding the pilot
Can
test.
everybody hear him? I just, sure, everybody can hear him?
And I'll repeat it, I can hear you.
Yeah, just regarding the pilot testing, regarding your slide, I wanted to understand more of the mass that was removed. Was it a gas or was it a solid? And what implications it had, because that was a pretty low number.
Yeah, so I'll start it off real quick and I'll let Nick explain a little more, but it is gas, that it comes out in the form of vapors.
So typically,
Can you just pick it up if you want? Take it out of the stand and put it in there. I think that might be easy. There you go.
so typically in cases like this, you have these contaminant molecules that are attached to the soil grains, or they are handling the space, the pore space between the soil grains. What soil vapor extraction does, it creates a vacuum in the subsurface. So these molecules come out or separate from the soil grain and are extracted through tubing that you saw in the pictures, and then go through a treatment system above ground. So that's what they're taking out.
So I'm understanding you, it's 0.23 pounds of molecules that were extracted.
0.23 pounds of that
Or
contaminant.
Yes, okay, thank you. One other question I had, if I can, has there been anybody that has come forward with a medical issue and trying to associate it with any of this testing?
So early on, Amanda did reach out to the California Department of Public Health, and we reached out also, I know, early on to Orange County Healthcare Agency, and we are not aware of any. And when Amanda looked into, they do like the cancer registries and stuff like that, there were no, statistical anomalies that said like this area has a higher chance of liver cancer, or higher liver cancers are detected here. So there wasn't that.
Thank you.
All right, John, you might have to stay here for a minute. Can we get the Ford specific info, please? This is related to the dangerous carcinogens. I'm not sure, do you want how to contact Ford, or? Oh, okay. So I'm assuming they want the Ford number. Okay. So, you know what, you bring it up to me and I'll give it to them, I'll put it up to the edge. Okay, thanks. So regarding the Ford information, we will read out the email, and there's a website as well, and we'll read that out in just a moment. Everyone needs a mic for the live stream audio, or the two needs to be respected. Oh, thank you. Okay, what is that? Okay, thank you. Obviously, we've never done live stream before. Okay, so for Ford information, you can go to www.fordnbfacts, so Ford, N as in Nancy, B as in boy, facts, FACTS.com. You can also call the project information number. That number is 833-949-3673. And there's also an email, and that is info, I-N-F-O, @Ford, F-O-R-D, nbfacts.com. So FORDNBFACTS.com. Okay, other questions?
Did you have any of the comments?
We do, because this is a live stream.
Yeah, sure, fine.
Other questions? Yeah? I'm going to let Sarah get the microphone to you because people can't hear, and I think I just learned embarrassingly that you have to use a microphone or the live stream folks can't hear you. Sarah, right up here, this lady in the white shirt, please.
Hi. This is all new to me, so I'm just gonna ask a dumb, simple question. I'm a homeowner that is thinking about leasing and or selling our house. I would love to know what area we're in. Are we in a low risk area, high risk area, a medium risk area? And I know you had that chart with the red, yellow, and green. Is there any way to find out our homes in red, yellow, and green?
So is your home been tested?
No.
Do you live in the area that it should be tested?
We
So
don't
that's
know.
the other question. Okay, so after the meetings, we have all the poster boards and we can go up and look, right, like where you're at. Yeah.
Okay, so you can tell home specific what risk you are. Because that would be really useful for people to know, you know, where you are, and because it's great, these maps are big, and it would just be nice to be more home specific. All right, and the other question I have is you talk about home monitoring. Are you talking that every home in this whole area is going to be home monitoring, or just high risk homes?
So what we're doing is the homes that fall within the investigation area, they have indoor air samples that have been collected, and they come in, and it looks like a little miniature, almost like a miniature propane tank. It's stainless steel. They drop it off. One day they pick it up. The next day it collects air from your home over a 24-hour period. They take it off to the lab. It gets sampled. Results come back. If a home falls within the investigation area, we want to see them monitored.
I can just add to that. So we have an investigation area, which is much larger than the actual area that we offer indoor air sampling to. For example, we sent out 1,400 to 1,700 invitations to this particular event, but we're not offering indoor air sampling to all of those homes. So there's a larger investigation area, which I can show you on the back figure there on the far left. That gray area represents the entire investigation area. The green shaded area represents the homes that have been offered indoor air sampling. And those homes are offered indoor air sampling based on the subsurface concentrations of the chemicals of concern that we're discussing. And it's that actually a concentration line that we call an ISO concentration contour line that determines whether or not those homes are eligible for indoor air testing. So I can walk you over, you can show me where your house is, and I can say, yep, we offered, you know, we did send a letter to this home offering indoor air testing, or you're outside of the area, and I can kind of give you an idea of where you fall within the plume as a whole.
But I guess what I'm trying to understand is, can we get enough information that we can say to a buyer or a lessee, this is the risk? This is the risk area we're in. I'm not, I mean, have you high, medium, and low risk areas? Have you something that I can say to these prospective buyers or sellers, here's where you are? Because we have we also have to,
Sure.
what's it called?
Real estate disclosure.
Yeah, disclosure.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the heck's going on, honestly.
Very good question. So the first thing to determine is whether or not you're in the area that's being offered indoor air sampling. If you're not in that area, then there is no deemed risk of vapor intrusion occurring. Now, if you are within that area, there is a potential risk, but in order to determine what level, right, green, yellow, or red you're on, we need to sample inside the home. So it's kind of a two-phase approach.
So for those of you that haven't had your home sampled, or if you want to know specifically any questions about your home, we'll be here afterwards and we're happy to talk with you. You can also, for the live stream folks, I'm getting this now, you can call the 800 number and make an appointment. We can Zoom with you and give you that information. That number again is 833-949-3673. And if you don't want to talk about it tonight, you can call that number and make an appointment, and either Mike or Jessica will talk with you and set up a call or a Zoom. Okay? All right, I have another couple questions here. How long do you anticipate this testing and monitoring will continue?
Well, we are hitting that first phase of remedy planning with those two communities that I had mentioned earlier. And so that's probably 3 years out just from there. So we're looking at 3 to 5 years at least still of monitoring. we encounter something unexpected, we're still looking into it.
Thank you. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add something. So the protocol is, after the remediation is completed, we're going to have to monitor for a couple of years to make sure there is no rebound, meaning the contamination doesn't come back. That's something that we do for all of our projects. So depending on how long the remediation takes, add another year or two before we can be confident enough to say this site does not need any further cleanup action, and basically give a clean slate.
How do you test your home?
So if if you're within the area to be tested, you can reach out to Mike and they can get you signed up almost tonight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're in an area to be tested and you haven't signed up, he's got the capabilities to get you signed up for that. And if you're outside the area, then there's no need for the indoor air testing.
And then, do you want to just go through what the process is as well? Because I'm not sure, maybe that was part of the question too, like how do you actually test air in a home?
Sure, no problem, I can do that. So, first step is if you, like Jessica mentioned, if you're inside the area that's being offered indoor air testing and you haven't, contact us, we'll set you up with an access agreement, which basically is a pretty straightforward access agreement that allows us to come into your home. The process is we come in to set up some air canisters. They're basically a silver sampling apparatus that collects air over a continuous period of time for 24 hours. They're fairly straightforward. They don't make any noise. We're in and out within 30 minutes. We conduct a building survey where we kind of map out where we place the canisters. We'll put typically 3 to 5 of these canisters, usually one in a bathroom, one in a living room, maybe one in a bedroom. We work with homeowners that may be sensitive in us accessing certain parts of their home, so we work with you to determine where those locations would be. We also work around your schedule to be there when you can. And then the next day we come and we pick up those canisters and then we send those to a lab to be analyzed, and then we take those results and compare them against the screening levels. If we do see results that are above a particular screening level, we will return within probably a couple of weeks to collect a 30-day confirmation sample. If we don't have anything over a particular screening level, you'll see us 6 months later where we like to collect another seasonal sample. Soil gases can behave differently during different seasons based on precipitation, temperature, moisture, things like that. And so we always collect a second 6-month sample. If we get 2 samples that have nothing above a particular screening level, our letter will indicate that there's no further action at that time for that property.
Can you repeat the mention about Belcourt Terrace? I think that's when we were talking in the presentation about.
Are you just referring to the, like, is it more like remediation? I mentioned for the draft feasibility study remedial action plan that's been submitted to us, and I'm working on that review and response. And once we send that response out, we will contact and say Ford Wood is going to reach out to the HOA board to coordinate a meeting for your community.
And that document is draft, but it is publicly available.
Did that answer the person's question? If it didn't, please raise your hand. Okay. Other questions?
We've been tested twice, but we've never heard anything. We know nothing.
Okay.
Just come talk to me. After the meeting, I'll make sure I look into that for you.
Okay. That corner. There.
I can
Oh, raise your hand.
actually, you just asked me a question, a friend of mine who couldn't make the meeting. He said that his home has a number of, he's in, you watch?
They watch.
He's over in the corner. Very rich, and he said his home has a number of filtration pieces of equipment. He's getting different readings, some extremely low and some extremely high. And I'm curious, and I'm sure he is too, he and his wife are too, what could cause that such irregularity in a single family home?
Okay, I'm going to repeat this question for the live stream, and I hope I get it right. So you're asking for a friend
Well, I live in Gulf Court, so
that lives in Bay Ridge, and he has a couple air filtration units running, and he's getting readings that are both high and low, and they're wondering why the fluctuation in a single-family home. Did I capture that correctly? Okay, and I'm doing that just so the folks watching can understand the questions.
So that occurs just because of the ventilation within the home. Air circulates more in certain parts and filters out, and then it could also be where the point of entry is, for where the higher the higher indoor air concentrations are seen. It could be that that's the entry point into the home.
And if I can just add, the air purifiers that they're referring to are air purification systems that are being provided by Ford in particular homes that have had concentrations above a particular screen level. And those air purifiers have been shown to be effective in knocking down concentrations below those screening levels.
Yeah, just one moment, we're going to get the microphone to you if you're patient. Thanks.
Okay, so this is kind of a side question, I guess, but it goes all the way back to the beginning. Do we actually know like what the original source was? Obviously, it's from Ford and the Aeronautics Space Division that was here, but was it them actually like deliberately dumping the chemicals into the ground? Was it just like overspill? Was it something that just soaked through the concrete? Do we have like actual information of what the negligence was at that point that caused it to be into our soil?
So a lot of the historical reports, there's some that are from the early 90s, early to mid 90s when they did a lot of the baseline assessments. It was just industry practice. So because the facility operated from 1953 until 1957 until 1993. And so a lot of it was just the work areas as far as my understanding from the project history. As far as negligence, I haven't seen any documentation that there was deliberate negligence or anything like that. I think it's just doing the work there. And so there were different source areas, and during their baseline assessment, they had their kind of source areas throughout the facility, and those primary source areas is what was originally remediated back in the 90s.
Mike, I'm just wondering, can you also say how long, because the facility operated fairly early before there were environmental regulations too, right? So 1957, so way before we had environmental regulations, there was some operations going on.
Also, way before we had a clear understanding of what these chemicals could do as far as carcinogenic.
This is from our chat box. Let's see. At the last meeting, it was mentioned that SVE, soil vapor extraction, skids would possibly be placed in parking spaces within the community. Has an alternative plan been created for skid locations?
Yes. Yeah, so I think probably we're referring to Bay Ridge Park, where we had originally showed multiple skid locations within that particular HOA. We're looking to consolidate into one location that will take up no parking spaces.
Is that at the fire gate? Is that location at the fire gate?
Yes, that's what we're looking to.
Is that where my place is?
I'm not sure. We're looking, so if you're facing Country Club Drive and you're standing on the fire road access, it would be to the left side.
Outside the gate?
Outside the gate.
That's like touching my house or my condo.
Okay. Yeah, we'll work with you on that. Definitely. I can show you some more slides over there too that might help.
So will that gate still be accessible as an emergency?
Yeah, I actually met with the fire department today, and they gave it the green light. Basically, as long as we don't have equipment blocking that, other than during construction activities, they have no issues with it.
Is the equipment going to be loud?
So the equipment does make noise, however, and I can show you in more detail over here on some of the poster boards, We will have an enclosure built around that. The enclosure will not only mitigate the sound, but it'll also match the surrounding buildings and match any colors or any tile that the CCNRs lay out within that homeowners association. But yeah, it does make noise, but there are things that we can do to mitigate that noise.
Yeah, 'cause I don't have
That's our number one concern, I think, is the noise with these systems, and we're very conscious of that.
When do you anticipate doing the install?
So I'm going to ask you to speak into the microphone because we have
anticipate
people
doing
who can't hear you.
installation of this particular skid at Bay Ridge?
I'll repeat the question. I think you said, when do we
Yeah,
think that
when
we'll
do
be
you
installing these?
anticipate?
That part is still to be determined. I anticipate towards the end of this year, early next year is when we would start construction.
And is that doing the trenching with the pipes is where you start?
Yeah, it's going to be kind of a twofold approach. The building, the enclosure that houses all of the equipment, that will be built off-site and be brought in and placed on a concrete pad by a forklift. And then the trenching will start from the SVE well installation points back to the treatment system. Our idea is that we would work simultaneously, but not like over the entire HOA at once. We would start at one well, install that well, install the trenching back to the system, flip it on, and then repeat that process over a number of times.
I'm just going to say too that before that work is done, we will have another community meeting with that specific community. We'll also be sending out a work notice to let you know in advance that that work is going on, and of course we'll include a number to call with any concerns about noise or any other issues. Okay?
And if I can just add, the remedial design implementation plan, which is the next document that we'll be producing, that is really the nuts and bolts of what the system will actually be. The feasibility study and the remedial action plan lays out the different alternatives and kind of a conceptual idea of what the system will look like. When we get to the RDIP is what we call it, when we get to that phase of producing that document, that's when we'll start working directly with the HOA board and the community members.
When do we get results of testing and results for a specific location? Does it mean we are not at risk if we have not been tested? Okay, so maybe that's just a comment. So, when do we get results of testing and results for a specific location? Does it mean we are not at risk if we have not been tested?
Good question. So there's a number of types of testing that we do. I'll start with the indoor air sampling. So if you've signed up to have your home sampled indoors, typically we come in, we collect the sample, we get the sample analyzed, we we validate the results of that from the laboratory, and we produce a results letter, and then that results letter typically goes out in 4 to 6 weeks to the property owner. That's one type of testing. The other type of testing that we do is the installation and sampling of either soil gas probes or groundwater monitoring wells, and that, as Jessica indicated earlier, is now produced in a semi-annual report which produces all of that data. Semi-annually. The next one is due August 13th.
If we sent in public comments to the Bay Ridge Remedial Action Plan or Cleanup Plan, will we get responses?
Yes. That public comment period ended on the 9th, and we are working on the responsive summary, and it is going to be included as an attachment to the final FSRAP. And then since those comments all came in email, I'm going to also email them to everyone as well.
So yes, you'll be getting a responsiveness summary that addresses your questions and how they were considered in the final decision. It'll also be uploaded to GeoTracker, and it will be put on the Ford website for this project.
I think I missed part of the last question, the previous question related to if we're not in the testing area, are we not at risk or at risk? If you are not in the green shaded area as indicated on some of the figures that we've provided and in the sample request letter and access agreements that we've sent out to those homes, then there is no deemed risk of vapor intrusion occurring in your property.
And I just want to provide some clarification as we're continually looking at the data, making sure the soil gas probes that were installed were not too far apart, that there could be, some going between. So they're continually looking at this plume and even adding probes here and there in certain areas. If a probe comes back with an exceedance of those screening levels that we utilize, then you would be offered indoor air. But this is the figures we have are pretty comprehensive, and we're not anticipating too much change off of that. The plume is pretty well defined, but there is a little bit of gray area. We have just recently pulled a couple buildings from the Newport North apartment complex into the indoor air investigation area. So as we get more data, things can change, but for the most part, it's pretty well defined.
All right, so until we get our house tested, there's no way to tie health problems to these dangerous chemicals. And even that house test doesn't test humans. Why isn't Ford doing anything about that?
I think it's also kind of important to note that the chemicals here, they don't bioaccumulate. So that's why they, there's some chemicals out there in the environment. Mercury, I think, is a good example. If you eat fish, it kind of hangs out in it. I'll let the toxicologist explain that.
Right. You say that these chemicals, they don't stay in your body for a long time. They get metabolized pretty quickly, they break down in your body pretty quickly. So it's difficult to do any like testing of people and tie that to a health effect. So the best thing we could do was to look at those registries from the health departments that collect data on birth effects and cancer cases and compare that to the surrounding areas. And they didn't find a difference in this area versus the surrounding areas. So other than that, there's not really a good way to do testing on rivers.
And let me ask you this question, Amanda. Since it does metabolize quicker, is that why these contaminants have the liver cancer is more associated with their kidney, and that's the non-cancer health effects affecting the liver or those kind of organs because it metabolizes quickly?
Yeah, the kidneys and the liver are the organs in your body that help you break these chemicals down, and that's where we see most of the toxic effects when you're exposed to a lot of it. Yes.
And then I think the second part of the question, Mike, is really for you. What is Ford doing? Maybe you can just explain the process here with the water board and Ford and you as a consultant.
Yeah, so Ford is the responsible party, and they are working under a voluntary agreement with the water board. They're not under a regulatory order. And in simple terms, Ford is doing everything that we are asked of by the water board and the community.
Great, okay. How far south of Belcourt has the gas gone? Is the gas at Corsica Villas?
So Corsica Villas is to the north, and there's just the smallest little. So are you talking about Corsica Villas to the north, right by Newport North Apartments? Or condos, the Corsica condos. So there's a little bit that it does go in, and I think there was, 12 homes or 16 homes that were brought into that, into the indoor air testing. But we haven't, I don't believe we've seen any vapor intrusion from the couple of homes that have been tested, and the concentrations are pretty low, and they're delineated right there by, what is it, Lawson, I think. And so it's primary right there. And after the meeting, we can walk up to the poster that's got that area to talk more if you'd like.
So again, if you'd like to know if your property has been specifically impacted or if you're in one of these areas, after the Q&A, we'll stay here and we have these boards and you can go up there and one of the project team members here can help you identify your house and tell you exactly where you are. Okay? Will the soil vapor extraction skid be a permanent fixture or will it be eventually removed after remediation? Maybe when you answer this, you can tell what a skid is too.
So I think we can move away from the term skid and look at it more as a shed. There's pictures up there of temporary sheds that will house the equipment. And no, they will not stay there permanently. The period of time that they will stay there initially is 1 year to assess the effectiveness of the SDP system. They could stay there a little bit longer after that to do what we call pulsing, removing contamination, letting it rebound, and then turning on the extraction system. But no, they're not going to be a permanent fixture.
And just to kind of add to that, when we get to the point of the soil vapor extraction system pulling out enough, and they turn it off, it will rebound. Typically, on very few sites does it not have some kind of contamination concentration increase. That is normal. And that's where the pulsing of the system comes into play, and we look to see just how much that comes back. And so a lot of times these systems go off for a few months and they turn them back on because there is the lower concentrations. That's going to be pretty common here, is to let it rebound, pull out a little bit, let it rebound.
Other questions? So this is just a comment, but I'll read it. It says, this is called, quote, kicking the can down the road, close quote. The chemicals might not remain, but they are carcinogenic and their effects do remain. Thank you for your comment. Other questions from people? I'm just going to give it a moment. Okay. For those of you that joined on the YouTube, again, you can call the 866 number if you'd like to have an appointment to talk about your property. 833 number, forgive me, 833-949-3673. For those of you that attended in person, we will remain afterwards and are happy to talk with you about your specific property, what some of the mitigation and remediation measures look like. And I'd like to thank you very much for attending. We know you could have been somewhere else. We appreciate that you came here. Thank you.